This talk is about the Python APIs in the future and how new Python features enhance developer workflows. But a little bit about myself, as Mihailo just said, I have 2 years of experience as a Python developer, and I work as a moderator at Fastapi, which is the third most popular library for Python right now. And I also, as an interesting fact, I coded in the Perl programming language on a work project, which I think is an achievement, personally. And what to expect from this presentation. First is Python 3 features evaluation. I want to look at the features that Python 3 added and which are important and which are not. Some of them are typing and async. Then I want to touch about the ecosystem improvement in the language this produces. And then a little bit in depth about Fastapi and SQL Model. Then obviously a section about questions. So if you're a Python developer and been in here for years, you know what your life has been for the last few years. It's basically, let's just switch to Python 3. Let's just try to keep it all together, working and just develop. But in 2021, Python 2 is dead officially. There's not going to be any Python 2 support, no anything. And this raises a question. What are you going to do now that you don't have any meaningful job to switch to? This was a question asked at my previous job when we switched to Python 3, and we were like, okay, but how does this help us? Like, sure, there's some new features, there's some new improvements, but like, how does it actually help us? And honestly, it's not that much, but there are some useful things. For example, these are the features added in Python throughout the versions. There are obviously more in each version, but I picked like the most important in my opinion. My favorite is probably breakpoint from 3.7, which greatly improves the way you debug stuff. But if you notice, most of these features, like, they're not actually that important, or they change your code that much. It's still the same Python, but with a few shortcuts. Which then raises the question, okay, what do we actually want Python to look like in a few years? What do we actually want to improve? Which is a very good question. And this was the question asked by JetBrains, who are makers of PyCharm and other editors. And these are the results. You can see them. And obviously, like, in the top for Python is always going to be improve performance, do compiler, JIT compiler, and compilers. But surprisingly, maybe to many, the first is static typing, which is surprising because Python doesn't really have it at all, and at least it didn't. But also I want to point out that this list is actually improving and degrading. So for example, pattern match in the fourth choice has been added in Python 3.10, and it's now a thing, so rejoice. But I want to touch on the first feature Python developers want, which is typing. And if you're a Python developer who lives around Java engineers or C# engineers, your life kind of looks like this, which is kind of true, because one of the reasons I didn't want to switch to Python was exactly this. That's the fact it's not typed, that it's all dynamically typed, you don't have anything, and it's really hard to program, which is really concerning for a lot of reasons. But I can rejoice you that Python actually has added typing. It's not the full typing you might want or expect, but it's still here, and it's improving very fast. It's improving very fast. On the left, you can see code which is not typed. This is basic code. If you're even in Python 2, you probably wrote this kind of code. It's very simple. It's very simple. On the right is the new code, the code that is typed. You can notice how there's more information which helps you read the code. For example, the stringify method takes an integer and returns a string. So there, you don't need to actually read what the method does or what it returns. You just know it from reading the first line. These examples are kind of simple, so they don't really prove a point. But if you take bigger code bases, bigger methods, this helps greatly, because you don't need to look through the entire 50 ifs to know that it actually returns a Boolean. But it doesn't actually affect your code, which is, I think, the main concern for me. But as Python does it, it will not change. So if, for example, in this code, we take a float and pass it through the stringify method, which is not allowed in other languages because it accepts an integer and we pass it a float. But Python still allows it and doesn't throw out any errors or anything like this. My editor does know there's some kind of error, but it doesn't stop any execution. Your code still runs, still perfect, but you can already see some errors. So how do you check for this? Obviously, just because you added some stuff doesn't mean that it's beneficial. It's more code to write, it's more verbose, so how do you actually check? For this, there is a tool called MyPy. There are many like this. All of them are from companies. So for example, like Google, Facebook have their own internal solution they use, but the base one for Python, and I think the first one you should use is MyPy. MyPy was originally developed as its own language, but then it switched to a plugin type system that you can just install via pip and use it like this. So for example, I have the same code as before. I now install the package, I run it for my method, and then it returns some errors. And this is how you actually, this typing improves your code. You can see that your code still runs, but then you can check it beforehand or afterhand and just change it. And there's a concept in typing called lateral typing. So in Python, your code, if the code base has been around for a while, for example, my last project had 12 years of Python code. Obviously, none of it is going to be typed. So that raises the question, okay, we have a code base and we want to make it typed. If we run it just with every single restriction, it's going to spit out 5,000 errors and you will not even start to dent it. So, and this is why MyPy has a very interesting solution. If you run it by default, you get less errors. You get like more serious errors, but the basic errors are kept away from you for now. You can enable them. In this example, for example, we run on the same file. This file has not been changed between runs, but if with the strict keyword, we get 3 errors instead of 1. So how does it work under the hood? The strict keyword actually includes a bunch of different commands, or you can include in your configuration when you run MyPy. And the idea of this is you install MyPy, you run it initially, you check all of the boxes, so it returns green after that, and then you slowly, one by one, include more of these checks, so your code becomes more typed slowly and slowly. This is a really neat solution, and it makes it so you're not afraid to actually start doing it, because you get 5,000 errors. The errors are contained, and you can slowly just improve it, which I think is a great idea. But besides typing, I think another important feature in Python is also async. Async is a very complex topic, and I will definitely not be able to disclose all of it in such a short amount of time. But the basic idea is this. If you have an application which just calls to some external servers or a database, you can make it more efficient by just running a few of these calls and then waiting for the response instead of your client waiting. So for example, in the synchronous example, we make a call and then we wait for a server somewhere else, from another company or something like this. We wait for the response, which takes a lot of time and is not very efficient. In asynchronous, we can just do some other stuff. That's the basic idea. And another thing is methods in Python. So if you know in Python, basically you define methods, but you just the name and then some. In Async, the idea is the same. You just have a keyword before that. That's it. Your method is now async, but to call it's not very efficient. It's still you still need to call a wait on other async. This is where a lot of the magic happens. This is why it's so easy in Async, because a lot of complexity is actually hidden in the libraries you use of your own code. And it takes a little more time. This is the of basic project are going to be lying around. You just add async, and on methods of the library you call await, and it works. Magic. Obviously, I said that async is a very big topic. I will not be able to cover, which isn't true. Which is true. I have before you have a series by Andras Lunga, who is Python's developer in residence. So he works on Python full time. He has a full series. You can see like it's 6 episodes, an hour each, basically, which covers all in-depth async methods, how to use it, and so on. And he even covers starlet, which is one cool framework. I highly recommend watching these videos. You want to be anywhere near like knowledgeable about async. I watched them like 3 times. I still don't really get it, but slowly and slowly it's actually improved. And then you might say like, okay, we have these features, they're really cool, but how do they actually improve my workflow? And my argument is this. When you add features to a language, developers won't use them initially. Why? Because the features added to languages are quite complex. They have different implementations. They have hard to figure out implementations, or like some Python specific stuff that is hard to figure out. This is where libraries or come in. I think libraries remove a lot of this like hardness or hardness from writing code by just improving. This is, for example, with async. If you wrote a database connection alone with async, it's going to take you weeks, if not months. Instead, you could just use a library that already did the hard work, and you can get the benefits of async, which I think is which is just profit. And this adoption is actually coincided with the removal of Python 2. For example, let's say Flask. Flask is probably the most popular library in the world right now for Python. And in one release, they removed support for Python 2 and added support for async and type hinting, which is just insane. Because I think this is where the point of Python was stuck on Python 2 for so long that the new features kind of didn't come through. And now there's like a renaissance. Python 2 is finally dropped, so there's new features for every library, and every library is just pushing out features constantly. Same as for Django, for example. And the big explosion because of this was in async frameworks. You can see most of them here. They are popular, but they still haven't like dethroned anyone. These libraries came to power because someone like Flask and Django, they still wanted to keep support for Python 2. So they didn't add these new features. They still like kept like Python 2, okay, we're gonna hold it for as long as possible. So these libraries came in, they said, we're not even gonna start to support Python 2, we're only Python 3, but you have the newest features, which for a lot of developers was a really good idea. And while it sounds nice in practice, like, yeah, they gained a lot of popularity, in reality, it didn't really make a dent. Flask and Django are still the most popular frameworks, without a doubt, but there's a new one called Fastapi. I actually hate this name. I think it's really confusing. I wish it had a different name, but we have what we have. And I want to just talk a little bit in depth about Fastapi and what it tries to solve. In depth, it's basically Flask, but it has a little more batteries than original Flask. So Flask, basically, you install the library, you can do some basic stuff, but if you want authentication, you need to install a library. If you want documentation, you need to install a library. And that's basically with everything. which is for me was very confusing because you needed to juggle a lot of libraries, a lot of versions, a lot of dependencies. Fastapi goes a little bit the Django way, where you just include a lot of stuff, but you still leave choice to the developer. And this is how Fastapi code looks. As you can see, it's really similar to Flask. It's a method defining endpoints instead of the class in Django. From the interesting, you can already see that there's types included and a thing called class item, which inherits from base model, which is for pedantic, which is also a very interesting idea. You get automatic documentation. As I said in Flask, to get this, you need to install a library, which I, from experience, know that it doesn't work many of the times and it gets weird results. This is built in. Fastapi knows how to deal with it, and it already shows your methods how it should. This is a Swagger. And if you want to work with frameworks, you probably need to use a database, which is why there's a database connection on your screen right now. What this does is uses SQL Alchemy Async. You can see that all of the complexity is hidden from you. All you see is an import for async, you add some string, and you add a bunch of asyncs and awaits. This is the power of the magic of Python, where all the complexity is hidden behind a library. You just need to find a tutorial that does it, and that's it. You can use it. If you want to define models, if you use something like Marshmallow or other solutions, you know that it's quite painful because you need to import a specific string or integer for that library. You need to use some specific things for that library, and it's quite unintuitive, I would say. In new Python, I would say, in Fastapi, you can just import one model, and then all of it you can just inherit and use the default Python how it is. So, for example, in hero base, we have a name, which is a string. We have a descriptor, which is a string. You're not importing any library to have the type. You're just using it right away. Another power is inheritance. If you ever used inheritance in SQL Alchemy, I know there's a tutorial about it, but I have no idea how it actually works. Here, it's as basic as Python. You just take some class and you add on it. And once again, you have an integer as a easily defined type. Yeah. And this is the thing I was talking about, where if you used SQL Model, which is a library added to Fastapi, you can use the default for Python, and you can use inheritance. But if you use SQL Alchemy, the default one, you need to import integer, string, and you cannot even use inheritance. Why is this a problem? Because, well, the solution for SQL Model is actually built into Python, so which means that it's easier to maintain for other libraries. You don't need to import for this specific library how it's implemented integer. It's all the same way because it's based on Python, the core of Python. So it's easier for other libraries to maintain. It's easier for frameworks to maintain. It's easier for editors to maintain. So they only need to support one library instead of multiple, which have their own string implementations. The structure of the endpoints in Fastapi. This is, again, it's taken from Flask, a lot of inspirations, but there's some unique stuff. For example, if you go from the top to the bottom, you can have an event that goes on startup. This is mostly like a database initialization step. It just starts your database. And in the endpoints, you can easily define them with your app.get, so it's a get method, or an app.post, so it's a post method. You can also have a response model. This is a thing which shows in your documentation. So in documentation, it shows, okay, this is an endpoint. It wants this type of data returned, or you can expect this data to be returned. And you can see that you have async and awaiting here really easily. You don't need to write some complex code. You just add 2 keywords and that's it. And your code is already faster if in the right circumstances. And also it's typed. So we have a response model is a list of heroes. We have on the post method, we expect a hero create, which has its own names and definitions. And this is where the power of typing really comes in. My editor, without me typing any keywords, anything, already knows, okay, this is a class, which is a hero create. It's gonna have a name and it's gonna have a description. And it's already helping me finish this stuff off without me actually like typing anything. Smart. And obviously it's all automatically documented as before. You can see that in the request body, we have an example of value, and you can already see that the type is a string. And you can see a successful response. You can also see the example values in that an ID will be an integer, description will be a string, and so on. Yeah, that's another slide that describes it. Here you can actually see that it's a list because of the way JSON does stuff. And so in the conclusion, Python libraries are moving very fast to adopt new features. So because Python 2 died, that's it. There's new features coming all the time because the transition between versions of Python 3 is quite easy. Like I haven't found any complex stuff right now. And typing and async already requires skills for a Python developer. This is a controversial opinion for many people. But I think it comes through because a lot of companies do want to use typing and async because it improves your code if it's on a scale. Yeah, it might not be perfect the way Java does it or C#, but it's still something. New frameworks are pushing Django and Flask to improve. This is mostly the case for Fastapi. So it because of the explosive growth it got, so it got released in 2019, and in 2 years it already has 14% usages, which is a lot. Like Flask and Django took years to get so much popularity. So this means that Flask and Django, like they look at these other frameworks, they learn like what do they actually add, and they added themselves. For example, Flask added some features that Fastapi had, which is a really cool thing. And we get better support in our editors. As I've pointed out before, like because we look at one implementation of Python, it's very easier to have other tools just inherit from it and have the entire ecosystem just improve because we all rely on one solution. And that's it. Any questions?
В'ячеслав, дуже дякую тобі за презентацію. Я сам заслухався, мені було самому дуже цікаво. А в нас же є певні запитання, вже є в чаті, але я всіх слухачів заохочую ще постити запитання, ще контриб'ютити, ще додавати. Мені здається, цікава тема, і тут є про що поспілкуватись. У нас в кожній доповіді, в цій і в наступній теж буде час на запитання, тому пишіть в чат протягом доповіді, після того і будемо обговорювати. Також я побачив, була трошки у нас проблема з інтернетом, і була гірша якість відео і презентації, тому у нас буде запис, ви можете це все передивитись, і також ми можемо поділитися самими презентаціями, де ви можете подивитись той код, який в живому режимі мав не дуже гарну якість, щоб його прочитати, от там, де він був дрібним шрифтом написаний. Отже, переходимо до запитань. Перше запитання. Why only MyPy? Why not Black, YAF, Bandit or other linters? V'ячеслав.
Because Black does not do typing support. Black only does support for like a space between methods or stuff like that. Black does not have specific features for support of typing and how it looks. I don't know why it's not there personally, but for now it's to a specific library for specific users. There's not only MyPy, there's multiple choices, but it's the most popular one.
Good, thank you. Next, it's a good way to start writing with typing in existing project without typing. So if you have a project without typing, how we can start writing code, typed code?
So I think first of all, you need to look at libraries. I think that's the most important part because a lot of the code you will use is actually from libraries. And because it doesn't have, it might not have typing support, it might lack, you might at some point just hit a brick wall where you cannot improve. This is the first thing. Thankfully, libraries are really fast improving right now for this specific thing. Like 2 years ago, it was way worse. Then I would add a checker. First of all, you can add a MyPy, you can add a Google one, you can add a Facebook. It will just have you just have a checklist like, okay, we have this many errors. Next week we're gonna have this many errors, and you can slowly just improve over it. And that's the way I would go, but I would not focus on it that much unless it's your primary goal. I would have it just like a task that you do when you don't have other tasks or you want to just chill.
Good. We have many more questions, so I will proceed faster. What you have done for being a contributor to Fastapi?
When I was working at my old job, I was chosen to pick a framework we would work on, and I picked Fastapi because multiple reasons at that point. And I remember at work I was solving an issue for about a week, and then the next week I saw someone else had the same issue, so I just helped them. And from that I just started contributing a little bit. And one day I just Fastapi created their Discord. I joined it and they gave me moderator. I don't know why.
So it looks like everybody can contribute.
Yeah, it's. I think the first point is just to actually use the tool, because I used the tool hard at work. I learned a lot of stuff, and at that point, there weren't a lot of people to help you with stuff. So I just came in and started doing it. Doesn't take a lot of time.
Good, thank you. Next one. As you know, Fastapi uses starlet. What do you think is better to use? Starlet looks like a bit flexible, a little bit flexible.
The flexibility is not really a point here, because in both Fastapi and starlet, you can pick your own database support, which I think is the most important thing. Previously, you also had GraphQL support. This also got removed, and in Fastapi you can use whichever library you can. Starlet is just a little bit more bare bones. If you enjoy working with that, sure. But for me, the difference isn't that major. I think Fastapi is just it's neater, it's easier, and it hides a lot of implementation you might be confused with.
Good. We have many more questions and not too much time, so I will read some of them because we have another speaker. So, Pydentic, как в схеме наследованной от base model прописать скрытое поле для того, чтобы не отображалось в схеме?
For this, you need to create another model, and then in the response model, so what the UI actually shows, you provide a different model. This is where inheritance comes into power. So you need a lot of models, and one model that you actually show the users, another one which is the internal one. This is how it's done in, I think, most documentation. I don't know a way how to do it in Pydantic specifically.
Great. Next one. Підкажіть досвід Fastapi in production. Дуже насторожує версія 0.70.
Тут така річ, що, наприклад, Flask мав версію 0.12 до 2018 року. Тобто він хіба в 2018 році дістав версію 1.0. І він вже тоді мав набагато більше юзерів, ніж навіть зараз Fastapi зараз. Тобто проблеми з цим нема. Fastapi для продакшену готовий, я його ранив в продакшені на минулому проєкті, і навіть проєкт, що в мене зараз, тобто Fastapi в продакшені є. Я знаю багато людей, які ранять, і все нормально. Тобто на версію не потрібно дивитися, бо ця версія не міняється через те, що інші бібліотеки теж на 0.6. І через це нема потреби, тобто поміняти не хочеться.
Дякую. Наступна. Чому Pydantic, а не Trafaret?
Trafaret я навіть ніколи не чув такого. Чому Pydantic? Ну, не знаю. Той, хто створив бібліотеку, сподобалось, то, що Pydantic юзає типи іменно Python. І це була ідея. Тобто в інших бібліотеках треба імпортити свої типи. А тут можна юзати просто Pythonівські. Напевно, через це.
Дякую. Кроме встроенного DI и Swagger с автодокументацией, в чем преимущество перед IO HTTP?
HTTP я чув про нього. Мені просто екземпляр коду, чесно, йому не сподобалось. Я так багато в нього не дивився, але він виглядає більш... Тобі треба писати більш речей самому. І я не знаю, як там супорт з типами. Тобто Fastapi, ідея в нього це перші типи, а друге це Async. Це два такі великі точки. В HTTP я не знаю, що там з типами, і там код виглядає більш такий складний.
Добре. Дивіться, у нас час трохи, ми виходимо із нашого графіка. Давайте ще одне запитання я задам, бо тут багато запитань і можете потім В'ячеславу слати. Я сподіваюся, він поділиться своїми контактами, може він вам в приватній розмові відповість. What is most popular third-party libraries to use with Fastapi, excluding JVT?
I know Fastapi users, which deals a lot with authorization, so like it just handles authorization for you, but there's not that many, as far as I know. Most of the libraries you will use is based on the database you will use. That's about it. Besides that, Fastapi has most things included. So you don't need to import more libraries. At least I haven't yet.
Дякую. Дивіться, з оглядом на час я пропоную на цьому зупинитися. До речі, В'ячеслав, подумай, яке запитання тобі більше всіх сподобалось. Ми зараз будемо, і ти, і наступний спікер, ми подивимося, які запитання найкращі, яке найкраще, ми навіть подаруночок приготували, потім з вами зв'яжемось і передамо. Якщо ти впевнений, можеш сказати зараз, то, будь ласка, звичайно.
Так, в мене відкрито всі питання. На жаль, до цього питання не дійшли.
Давайте дійдемо, давайте. Давайте ще одне питання, яке найкраще, звичайно.
Оце питання better is included, третє знизу.
Ага. Так. Питання про Fastapi, про який було сказано better is included, чи наявна якась система IOC контейнер, також відома як Dependency Injection Framework.
Yeah, it's included by default. In my slides, this was the depends keyword. It's included and it's widely used. In my examples, it's used as a database session getter, so you get a session of the database. It's widely used everywhere. Like I think every example of Fastapi has it, and I haven't had any bugs with it. It's a little bit confusing to start with, but if you know dependency injection, it's really easy. So that's the best question I would say.
Супер, тоді його відмічаємо. І, на жаль, це анонімус. Я не знаю, чи хтось може написати, хто це запитання задав, хто це є, тому щоб ми якось... Чи я не знаю, В'ячеслав, ти може бачиш? Так. Ну, принаймні, в мене відображається як анонімус, тому як зв'язатися з цією людиною, я поки що не знаю.